If you've been reading the news lately or have some sort of functioning organs, you probably already know what's happening in the news lately. Reading CBC News and various news articles shows juicy comments about exactly how well the government's doing in Ontario to regulate the price of electricity. In this video, I'll be discussing the Ontario hydro crisis. First off, Ontario's energy infrastructure is one of the best in the world. We have an astonishing amount of clean energy power and almost limitless hydropower, with plenty of forested areas and lakes to help minimize any carbon emissions we do release, as well as a majority of Canadians living within this narrow corridor along the southeastern corner, which is probably one of the best scenarios for distributing electricity. However, we all know why we're here, to see exactly what went so wrong with the hydro system in Ontario. From one of the hidden gems of Canadian engineering and environmental ingenuity to become the laughingstock of all of North America. We'll be taking a look into the series of events that led to a complete and utter scandal known as the Ontario Great Hydro Scandal. First, in order to get a clear understanding of what's going on, we first need to understand where electricity comes from and how it's handled through a series of public and private suppliers and producers and transmitters who actually get it to your home. All of these play important roles in getting electricity from a raw resource such as uranium, natural gas, or hydropower to current delivered to your home to power electronics and appliances. First off, Ontario, as I said, is one of the most efficient and advanced energy producers in the world, in line with most European countries or better, with an astonishing 59% of all electricity in the province generated from nuclear power. Just to put this in perspective, Ontario alone competes with entire nations for the percentage of electricity that comes from nuclear. If compared to all other countries in the world, it would only rank second behind France, which generates 76% of its electricity from nuclear power. Just to put this in perspective, Ontario alone produces as much nuclear power as the entire country of Germany, an export and economic powerhouse in Europe. The second largest source of electricity is hydro, which accounts for 23% of all electricity production, from multiple dams spread out across the province, and most notably Niagara Falls, which is the largest producer of hydropower in all of Canada. However, this is barely half of what Quebec produces from hydro, which totals 63% of their total electric output, and a fraction of what British Columbia produces at a mind-boggling 91% of total electricity output. This explains a lot of the difference between electricity prices in British Columbia and Quebec compared to Ontario. However, the most influential and important energy source is yet to come, and for an important reason. Natural gas, as I'll explain later in this video, is probably the most prolific part of understanding why electricity and hydro rates vary so much from time of day and city to city, totaling just 17% of electricity output, but probably the most controversial source of electricity in Ontario besides wind power, which till this day only produces 3% of the entire electric output of the entire province, with coal-powered plants coming in at just 2% of the entire output of the province. Well, it looks like coal isn't coming back anytime soon. The reason why this is so important to understand is that the electrical system is probably the most expensive and complex man-made system in the world. It is arguably one of the most expensive pieces of infrastructure in Ontario. Estimates put the entire value of the power grid in Ontario at about $500 billion as of March 2017. Before we get into recent news and the scandal at hand, we need to understand exactly where electricity comes from, how it's produced, and the real-world challenges of producing electricity in a modern society. If you're a person who pays their bills and doesn't like to be an uncivilized human being living in the forest, you've probably seen on your bill that there's time of use and different rates for such. While nighttime electricity use is around 7 cents per kilowatt, it usually doubles around peak time during the middle of the day. Why is this? Well, simply put, there's two types of electricity production in the hydro system. There's baseline and on-demand. Baseline electricity production does the heavy lifting of the power grid, producing the bulk amount of electricity used in the grid. These baseline sources include nuclear, solar, hydro, and wind plants, as well as coal and any renewable energy sources. The reason for this is that these electricity sources simply can't be ramped up or ramped down with electricity demand. For example, with wind and solar, you're at the mercy of Mother Nature, and with nuclear and hydro, simply trying to increase or decrease the amount of electricity produced creates a huge spike in current, which can damage enormous transformers and send power surges damaging homes, appliances, and various other electronics along the way. For example, the Bruce Nuclear Energy Plant, to even decrease its output by 1%, means a 10 megawatt decrease, which is an enormous amount of electricity, and it will create huge instability in the power grid. For obvious reasons, you can't fiddle around with a nuclear reactor and speed it up whenever you feel like, unless you want another Chernobyl in your hands, which isn't a good idea. So this leaves natural gas, as I mentioned earlier, is probably the most important form of electricity production in order to understand time of use. The reason why it's so expensive to turn on a blow dryer at 7 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. is not that electricity is more expensive this time, it's simply the demand of electricity. Think of electricity as this constantly changing line. You must produce electricity to keep up with this constantly changing line. You will never know how high it will go or how low it will go, but you have a simple job, is to make sure that this line never reaches this line. It's a pretty difficult task for anyone to do. Well, imagine this with 13 million people across vastly different regions, densities, and stretching thousands of kilometers. Too much electricity and you get power surges costing millions in damage. Too little and you get blackouts, brownouts, or complete failures in the grid outright. This is basically the battle hydro companies have to fight each and every single day just to keep the lights on without any interruption. Of course, this is much easier when electricity is stable and predictable, like in the middle of the night, and the bulk energy production sources like nuclear and hydro can easily cover this load. However, when it's the middle of the day and millions of people are getting ready for work, turning on the lights, appliances, or watching this YouTube video, hint hint, this is where natural gas kicks in to produce much of the needed surge electricity that power-hungry cities demand. These plants mainly consist of gas turbines, essentially ones ripped from planes like this, and connected to generators, as they can easily be sped up and wound down to maintain stable electricity to meet with demand that's constantly changing throughout the day. Imagine hundreds of these plants stretch over thousands of kilometers, connected to different cities, different power grids, and serving completely different electricity consumption profiles. You can imagine how extremely expensive and costly this can be, as thousands of highly trained engineers need to be ready at a moment's notice to constantly and consistently change the amount of electricity produced to maintain a stable and safe electricity grid. This is why electricity prices vary so differently from time of use. This is why governments heavily encourage people to do most of their electricity-hungry chores during the night, where easy and stable electricity sources can provide most of your needs. The third part of the equation is distribution. Dense cities are much more straightforward to send electricity to, as you have hundreds of customers per kilometer of transmission. You can simply send ultra high voltage current to a substation in the section of city that you want to wire up, and apartment after apartment full of hydro customers lie in your wake, with only a few kilometers between them for transformers and wiring to handle the current. However, this is only half the picture, as a lot of hydro customers live in sparsely populated areas and often medium density areas like suburbs and commercial areas, where each individual customer might need a kilometer or more of transmission line just to reach them individually. By far, the most expensive customers are rural customers, and this is simply by economics and physics. For every kilometer of wiring the electricity has to travel through, it incurs what's called loss, where the resistance in the actual physical wire causes heat to build up in the wire, therefore losing some of the electric current that's going through it. On average, only 3% is lost to most customers. However, to rural customers, this can be up to 5 to 10%. This cost is often subsidized or averaged out by adding the cost to the total distribution cost for the entire area, or city, or region. Now that we got a clear and concise view of exactly how electricity works, how it's produced, and where Ontario lies in the world in terms of energy production, and get down to the nitty-gritty of exactly how an advanced and sophisticated electric system can be so horribly mismanaged that it has become the single most important hot topic political issue in the province.